Hi there and welcome to this Rethinking the Human Factor Cybersecurity mini-series, episode 6 with your host Bruce Hallis, brought to you in collaboration with our friends at Proofpoint. Now for you, those of you who are new to the show, what is the show all about? Well, it's all about raising awareness, influencing behaviour and fostering an organisational culture where cybersecurity is truly valued. Now, if you're new to the show, let me tell you a little bit about the format. What we do in the show is we get great guests from the world of academia and from practice, sometimes people who straddle both sides of the fence, who specialise in aspects of human awareness, behaviour and culture, or they specialise in bringing around changes in awareness, behaviour and culture. A lot of our guests have come from outside of the cybersecurity industry, and that's not really surprising because the challenge of awareness, behaviour and culture is not unique to cybersecurity. So we've always been really interested in trying to understand what other people, other industry sectors do when it comes around to, raising awareness and influencing behaviour and the role of culture in doing that. But we also get stakeholders within employee education and awareness, whether they come from within the vendor space within the cybersecurity industry or they are actual practitioners, directors, education and awareness managers and security professionals who have got that massive challenge, like all our listeners, of bringing around those changes and reducing human factor risk. Now, today we have episode 6 in the cybersecurity mini-series, and this is the end of the cybersecurity mini-series. And as such, we've put a challenge to our guest to sort of help summarise the key aspects that she's sort of taken away from the previous episodes and to sort of wrap that with some further insights from her own experience working in the human factor now for a number of years within the cybersecurity industry. So without any further ado, let's get on with that interview. Hi there, welcome to this, the Rethinking the Human Factor podcast with me, your host, Bruce Hallis. Now, it's great to have you here with us on the show again for this, the final episode in our cybersecurity mini-series with Proofpoint. So this particular guest rushed to come and join us on the show, said, yeah, I'm up for coming and joining us on the show. What they didn't realise is that they had to summarise the previous 5 episodes all in the same amount of period of time as well. So this person is clearly up for a challenge, and a challenge of coming on the show and trying to make sense of everything that we've talked about and the importance of having the human at the center of your design when it comes to awareness, behavior and culture, when it comes to cybersecurity, is something that we're going to be talking about today. And our guest today is Danique, or Nikki as she prefers to be called.
Nikki,
okay.
It's easier.
Nikki, it is easier. I've got to admit, yeah, it is easier. Cosgrove. And Nikki is the Director of International Product Marketing at Proofpoint. Nikki, great to have you on the show.
Hey, Bruce.
Right. So we always, for somebody who's got such a difficult task, summarizing everything up at the end of these 6 episodes, we've got a really easy opener for you. Do you want to tell us a little bit about who Nikki is and, what it is you do and the journey you've been on to get to where you are?
Well, actually, I think that's the hardest start. Who am I? No, but I run international product marketing at Proofpoint. Been at Proofpoint for about 6 years now. My team and I joined through an acquisition of email fraud defense. So that's a division of a company that was called ReturnPath. And fundamentally, email fraud defense was all about protecting organizations' identities. So it's interesting because I think with this conversation, it's very much going to be about the identity, protecting that identity, protecting the human. But what we did at that time was protect domains, prevent criminals from spoofing those domains, pretending to be those organizations and tricking people into interacting with their phishing threats and mirrors and so on. Yeah, so joined Proofpoint. Before that, I was at Forrester Research, worked closely with Andrew Rose, who was previously on the podcast. Yes.
Yeah.
And at Forrester, I was advisor to our CISO customers, helping them take a lot of the research that Andy created and implement it into their organizations.
Yeah. That's the connection with Andrew, is it? Yeah. I think it's quite interesting, actually, when you see a lot what's going on in terms of people that are having probably more forward-thinking discussions around the whole human sort of side of cybersecurity. A lot of it has come from organizations which have a core part of what they do is going out and doing research. So not taking the assumptions that we were making. It's like challenging the assumptions through a research program, boiling that down into something which can be applied within the context of security. And, yourself, Andrew, there are other people I know that is like, this is all just seems to be coming of age You think that whole human-centric design piece, it's all coming of age. Would you say that's right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everything with cybersecurity, you have to, I personally believe you can't solve for something you don't understand. And, you need that visibility, whether it's on the technical side or on the human side. You need to understand on the technical side how criminals are trying to bypass some of those technical controls that you've implemented to ultimately make sure that you improve on those controls, make them stronger, make them more resilient against those attacks. And on the flip, on the human side, you have to understand human psychology. You have to understand what makes people click. What are the different techniques that the criminals are using to socially engineer those people into interacting with their threats? If you don't understand that human psychology, it's very difficult then to change that behavior. And really, all you're doing is just raising awareness and talking at these people for hours on end, and it's not driving the behaviors that you want. So you need that visibility, you need that understanding before you can ultimately build a program that drives the organization and your people towards the direction that you want them to go.
I think it's a really interesting point. I mean, the need to actually have an understanding. I've always said, if your objective is to raise awareness, influence behavior, foster an organizational culture, then surely at the heart of that, you've got to understand something about human awareness, human behavior, culture, because otherwise you're making guesses. And some of those guesses might actually pay off, but actually to increase the likelihood of you making the most of your time, you need to understand that you have to have those foundational basics that you can then go away and design things from.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the standard program, and I think we're jumping the gun here a little bit, but it's great because I think it links perfectly to what we're talking about. If you look at the standard structure of a security program and our recommendations of how organizations should ultimately build those programs, it starts with an initial assessment. I think people have confused the reason for creating simulated phishing attacks. They've confused that motivation. It's really not to trick employees. It's not to catch them out and, potentially have a negative consequence because they fell for a phishing email. It's to get that baseline. Yep. It's that initial assessment to say, okay, who understands that threat that's targeting them? What is our risk profile of the organization? What's the current knowledge base within our business? Where are the gaps? What's that benchmark of my industry, of the organization, of, this specific type of threat or technique? And where are we at as a business? Because once you have that initial assessment and benchmark, you then know where you need to go.
Yeah.
But without that initial assessment, like you say, you're really just throwing things at the problem and not really knowing if it's moving the needle.
And that's, I guess it comes back to the whole concept of metrics and the value that's perceived around education, awareness and behavior and culture. There's quite often people report, it's very difficult to get across to the organization the value of my role as the CISO and I'm responsible for education and awareness, or as the education and awareness manager, the value of what I do. And that's because they haven't done the baseline. They haven't identified where they need to be, and they haven't done the baseline. So it's all a little bit like, we're going to throw it out there and see what sticks.
Yeah, and it depends on what you're measuring as well. Because a baseline and that benchmark will be different for every company based on your specific risk profile. Your benchmark could be how many people are clicking on phishing emails, and we want to bring that number down. Your benchmark could be, or your baseline could be, how many people are reporting those phishing emails, and we want to increase that number. So based on that benchmark and what you're trying to achieve, that will then drive the metrics that you're measuring. But oftentimes I see it flipped, where they start with the metrics of, we want to be at 1% click rate. Is that what's effective for your business? Is that where you want to be as a business? Is that going to move the security needle for you? Or do you actually want more people reporting that, hey, I might have clicked on something or something looks suspicious in my inbox? Again, it's what is your risk profile? What's that threat profile for your business? And what are you trying to achieve with your security awareness program?
So often when people talk about baselines, you either do a baseline against other people in your industry. What does everybody in the telecoms industry, for example, what is it they're doing? And sometimes that baseline could be, how much are they spending as a percentage of their actual overall IT security budget, for example? Or it could be, coming down, you'd be looking at other types of metrics. So you can get a baseline against that. But then some people will turn around and go, well, our baseline is for security or cybersecurity is we comply with NIST, for example, at this particular level, or ISO 27001. How do you come up with a baseline for something that is so immature in our industry? Because it is immature.
That's a good question. And I don't think it's one or the other. I don't think you can only rely on ISO on this, or you only rely on organizations. Again, I think it depends on your business and your organization. So, and other baselines could be industry surveys, looking at other peers or size of organization. You could leverage outsource organizations to say, okay, you know what, let's benchmark your specific company and see how it looks against the largest companies in the country or in the region or across the world or in your industry. I think it limits it if you only leverage NIST or only leverage ISO, because those are recommendations. Those are guidelines.
Yeah.
And, lines are blurring and things continue to change, and the security strategy and the controls that you implement and the programs that you build also need to adapt. And I think the problem with things like these standards and frameworks and recommendations is they're quite static, and it takes a long time for them to adapt. But based on what you implement in your business, based on how you see the numbers trending, you can then use that as well. Use yourself as a benchmark. You can use those numbers to adapt and change your program to based on where the metrics are showing you that things are moving. And I think this is a time for the stats as well, because one of the things that we mentioned, when we were preparing for this podcast is obviously COVID-19 and the impact that that's having. And, there's no doubt that COVID-19 is changing everything. Where organizations training might have been a 1-hour workshop in the office, super interactive with people in a room, and you can actually see that they're engaged. Although the science shows that doing big training programs doesn't work. It raises awareness, but it doesn't stick. You have to repeat it in bite-sized chunks at time of, interaction, or when someone's clicking on something or making a mistake or potentially questioning something that's in their inbox. But, the positive thing about COVID-19 is a large number of people are remote. And we've seen an increase in companies implementing training programs, and oftentimes for the first time, because of remote working and because of the pandemic. And because they recognize that their employees are no longer in the office, they can't do these big 1-hour training sessions or half-day training sessions. So we're seeing them create these new programs that train employees around the risks of remote working and how to protect data. And yet, of all of the security professionals that we surveyed in 2020, this was about 600 security professionals in a report called State of the Fish, only 36, a third of the security professionals that we surveyed, revealed that they train their employees on safe remote working habits. Only 36.
Even though it's been such a massive change in terms of the working environment.
Exactly. Changing the way people work, changing the way they're interacting with data, downloading, uploading, moving to the cloud, storing on their personal devices. You've got kids using parents' work machines. You've got people downloading things onto their personal devices, working on iPhones, Zoom, Slack, sharing information on lots of different channels. And yet only a third of security professionals have trained employees on what good looks like in handling information and staying protected in the remote world.
So what does that tell us?
It tells us we have a long way to go.
That's a short answer, isn't it?
It tells us we still got a way to go.
Yeah.
On the positive, 96 of those respondents recognize that their employees have moved, and they recognize that awareness is important. And I told you it was stats, another 80% of the organizations we surveyed stated that awareness training reduced phishing susceptibility.
Okay.
So on the positive, more and more security professionals are recognizing that training programs work. That if you do it well, and if you do it on a regular basis, and if you do it in a way that engages employees and in a way that they can understand without using jargon, it works. Yet, there's still a long way to go in making sure that more organizations see the value of these training programs, not only to their businesses, but also to the security programs.
When you mentioned that stat, about 36% of the respondents said that they had deployed further training for the workers. The things that spring to my mind straight away are how much. So they said they responded and they provided training. Was that the same training that they had provided for people who were within the organization? So this is like, we're just going to roll it out. Instead of it being for an office environment, we're rolling out the same content for the remote environment. Online. So it's just a case of we just need to get training out. The second point is how much time, what part of the planning process had looked at these are the potential scenarios, and preparing, because a big change doesn't happen. It doesn't give you 6 months notice. It's like it happens and it's quick. Okay. And then you're like, okay, so have we got the content lined up for this massive change in environment where we suddenly got everybody working from home? And it could have been as simple as not even a pandemic. If there'd been a security scare and a building had collapsed as a result of, I don't know, explosion or something like that, whatever it is, it's suddenly like people can't come from the office. So it makes me just wonder to go, how much of that lack of response to the change in the world we were working within was also down to a failure to, as part of planning, to making sure you've got a strategy, like a content strategy that enables you to respond to changes that are going on in the world as well.
Yeah, that's a very excellent point. Now, I can't speak to the 600 respondents and what they're doing within their organizations, but I can speak to the organizations that we've been working with at Proofpoint. And in fact, just before this discussion, I did a training session for, how do I describe them without giving them away? I guess they're a manufacturer of things that move on the road. And
okay.
I wonder.
Answers on the postcard, please, to Rethinking the Human Factor at I Have Not Got an Idea.
Indeed. But I just got off a training session with them. It was obviously virtual, and it was to who they call their ambassadors. And this was a group of about 200 people. It's a large organization, obviously tens of thousands of employees. Yep. Some are information workers, some are working in the factory, some are in design, some are in security and so on, marketing. And it was a group of people that they've identified as ambassadors because they are very interactive with everything the security is presenting, sharing. They're very engaged. They're talking to their colleagues about security, they're reporting, so on and so forth. And this training session, the security awareness team had said, Proofpoint, we need your help in engaging with these ambassadors, not just talking about threats that are facing us as an organization, but more broadly talking about COVID-19 mirrors in the private space and the public space and employees' private lives and the work environment, because they recognize, they've seen the data, right? Yeah. Again, back to metrics. What metrics are you looking at and how is that driving the security program? Mm-hmm. They looked at the security metrics. They saw that over 99% of the email phishing threats that were being delivered to the organization were leveraging COVID in some way.
Yeah.
Whether it's, we're the World Health Organization, here's an email about the latest vaccines, or, it's DHL, click on this link so that you can book your next vaccination. Yeah. Or, it's a job candidate saying, hey, I want to apply for a job. I try to come on site, but obviously COVID, so here's my CV as an attachment. And it's the criminals being hyper wet, back to that people-centric security, that human factor. They recognize that it's a lot easier to get someone to do something, to click on a link, download an attachment, or send the money or data directly, than it is to find a technical vulnerability and hack the network or hack the device.
Yep.
And so this organization that we just engaged with recognized that more than 90% of the threats were using COVID in some way, and they wanted to not necessarily push information at them about what they should do, at employees about what they should do, but just general information. So that if you see something like this in your personal inbox, in your Gmail, Yahoo, Hotmail, you know that it's potentially suspicious. If you see something in your corporate inbox that includes coronavirus, urgent, payment, now, you know that it's potentially suspicious.
Yeah.
And it was super interactive. So many questions, so much engagement, because it felt real. It was timely. It was something that was topical. So you're absolutely right, Bruce, in that when you're building a program, it can't be generic. You can't copy paste from the physical world into the remote world, from the office world into the digital world. It needs to be specific to the threats that your employees are actually facing, which goes back to what we said at the beginning, that you need visibility to create those benchmarks and build programs that are relevant to your risk profile.
Now, this is really important because one of the things that I do when I do my training, and at first I could still remember the first class I did this, and the tumbleweed. I was a big fan of U2, and all I could think of was the Joshua Tree from the late 1980s. I was like, so much tumbleweed involved. I'm sure Bono would have been proud of my work. But yeah, it was the sense of information strategy. And people were like, information strategy, well, what are you talking about? And the whole point was like saying, look, awareness, behavior, culture, these are your objectives in terms of awareness, behavior, culture. And you said, okay, so what is the information you need to gather to enable you to know where you are, where you want to be, and how you're progressing along that particular path. And it's an information strategy. It's like an enterprise architecture is reliant upon having the right information to enable you to make better decisions about where you want to invest more and more of your time and less of your time, isn't it? And this is what you're talking about. You're saying the switched on organization, in effect, knows where it's going, the metrics associated with that, and the information that basically feeds those metrics, that empowers you to make decisions about, what's the next step. And if you do it properly, if you got it in place at the beginning, actually what you can do is you can turn around decisions relatively quickly. And that's great because the cyber criminals are making decisions pretty quickly. Okay. Whereas if you have to stop and sit back and think, okay, we need to put in place the information. We need this information to make this decision. What's the systems for gathering that? That's all going to take months, if not years. And that's going to put you behind the cyber criminals, surely.
That's absolutely right. In essence, what you just described is what we describe as a people-centric security strategy, where it's, we often ask CISOs, do you know who your very attacked people are, your VAPs? It's who are the people that are most targeted? That human understanding. How do you know when and how they're being targeted? Who are the people that are most vulnerable? Who keeps clicking on things? Who keeps falling for phishing? Who keeps compromising their credentials? And finally, who are those people that have access to systems and data where it would be problematic if they were compromised? It would have a significant impact on the business if they were compromised. And many security professionals have no idea who those people are.
Yeah.
And what we find is they still have this network view of security where it's, I need to have this schematic of my endpoints and servers and databases. And, we've outsourced our data centers. It's Google and Microsoft and Amazon. It's there in the cloud.
It's a cloud. That diagram is just a picture of clouds. And you're like, yeah, that's ours.
Right. But we still have this legacy view of we need firewalls and microsegmentation. And of course you need those things.
Yeah.
Because it's by implementing those things that the criminals have now shifted to people.
Yeah.
They're now creating a people schematic of our organizations.
Yeah.
They understand who's in finance and processes payments. They understand who the new interns are. They know who's in PR and has access to confidential customer data before it's been released to the market. They know who's in HR, whose job it is to open every single attachment that lands in their inbox legally. Yeah. They have to read those CVs. Yeah. They know how our businesses work and they know how our people operate. So they've created that network of people schematic where we're still often looking at the network. And so we need to have that people-based view. We need to understand who those very attacked people are, how they're being targeted, who's vulnerable, and what data and systems they access. And only then can we build a program like that manufacturing company that builds things that moves on the road. Only then can we build a program that trains people on how they're actually being targeted and prevents them from interacting with those threats if it does land in the inbox. Yeah.
It's an interesting thing throughout all the years that I've been involved in cyber, well, even before cyber, information security. One of the things that consistently come up was the sense of we're always playing catch up. And for me, this is one of those areas where the opportunity is for us to level the playing field. Cyber criminals have an information strategy. Okay, their strategy is that they gather enough information to increase the likelihood of their attacks being a success.
And they're sharing that information.
Yeah. And so you've got to say, well, if they have the forethought to sort of understand these things, to design a strategy to give them the information for them to make better decisions about how their attack is going to be uniquely tailored towards all these different organizations, okay, isn't it about time that we did the same?
Isn't it about time that we protect the people themselves and put people at the center of our security programs?
Yeah.
Isn't it about time that we understand, stop, and gain visibility into the threats that are targeting our people, not the devices? And isn't it about time that we implement a people-centric security strategy where our people are the perimeter, our identities are those intellectual property assets that we need to protect, the crown jewels? Mm-hmm. It's the data, but it's also those identities. It's those people that are working every day to deliver value to their customers and to the business. And we need to think of them as an asset that requires protection, not just the devices that they work on.
Okay. Now, you mentioned ambassadors earlier, so I'm just going to ask you a question about this. Often,
with ambassadors, and then this is, well, I say often, this is my experience of ambassador programs. There's this outreach to find people who want to be ambassadors. And we did some research and through consulting projects, as I used to do consulting. And one of the things we found was that consistently the same people would respond to engagement around education and awareness. And then, funnily enough, these were the same people that were also then responding to the call for ambassadors. What makes a good ambassador, but also what could potentially be a risk in terms of ambassadors? You've got somebody that just loves IT, but isn't working in IT. Do they make a great ambassador, or are they sort of have a natural bias towards a particular thing? Because I get asked this a lot about ambassadors, and I like the concept of investment programs. I like the idea of being able to scale. So you got, instead of like your team of 10 people in education awareness, you've got 250. And then there's definitely an argument. The more people are on the ground, more observation, more information, insight you get. Unless they're influencers themselves, how effective can an ambassador be?
You know, just like with technical controls, you can't outsource your risk to a cyber insurance company. You can't outsource your risk to a vendor. Ultimately, you own and accept or do something about that risk, mitigate that risk. Similarly, you can't outsource your security awareness program to employees because fundamentally they have jobs, right? They have jobs to do. And to require them to ultimately be an extension of your team can work, but won't work full time because they have jobs to do. Yep. I think ambassadors are good because, you know, they're spreading that message further. They're talking to more people about it. They're more aware about it. And, you know, again, it depends on what you're trying to get from your ambassador program. Do you want them to be an extension of your team, or do you want them to be that group of people that are hyper aware? And if they see anything in the inbox, again, they're the group that you can count on to alert security about it. That, hey, this looks suspicious. And they're always there engaging with security, aware of it, and reporting these suspicious emails and messages to the security team. Yeah. What is the objective of your ambassador program? But I think if it is to spread that message of security, then we need to enable them. Again, just like with training programs or awareness programs, it is not enough to just do a 1-hour Zoom or, you know, a 30-minute training and forget about it. We also know that now, post-COVID, people are bombarded by messages. Everybody is trying to communicate with employees. Finance is communicating with them. HR is communicating with them. Security teams sending them messages. Their colleagues are sending them messages. Customers are sending them messages. I mean, I'm already overwhelmed just listing all of that. Yeah. So they are bombarded by messaging. We all are. Yep. And so to expect them to always be aware of security and have it top of mind is unrealistic. So what we need to do is be there with them on a regular basis, holding their hands, enabling them in whatever way we can so that they too can spread that message. And we need to make it easy. There was an example of an organization that we worked with. This was before they implemented the security solutions, the awareness solution. And their recommendation to the business was, if you see anything suspicious, download the email, open another email, attach that email, the suspicious one, to the one that you open, find the email address of the security team on the intranet somewhere, and then forward that email. That is not easy. No. And nobody is going to engage with that. Nope. So if we do want these ambassadors to be successful, we have to enable them, but we also have to make it easy for them to take that message further.
Yep. Okay. So going back to the people-centric approach that you were talking about there, and I guess the importance of the information, I can think about all our listeners that are, I don't know, a year into, they did their strategic review a year ago. Okay. Somebody said, we're redesigning the website. And they said, well, who's your ideal customer? I said, not somebody that's just done their strategic review. And they were like, they're going, why is that? Because they don't want to break their heart. But yeah, if somebody has just gone through that review process and they've got a 3-year strategy, can you sort of backtrack and start to integrate these insights in, even though it's not in our strategy, but I'm listening and I'm like, no, we really could benefit from actually having a human-centric. Can you re-engineer an existing strategy to ensure that it's got a human-centric approach in it?
Absolutely. Again, like I mentioned, your security program has to be flexible enough to adapt because things change. I mean, ransomware is in the news now. It's all anyone can talk about, care about. The board is asking you, are we going to be colonial? Is it going to be a problem for us? So your security program has to be able to adapt and adapt quickly. And that needs to be based on the current threat profile. And if we look at the top 3 threats that are impacting businesses today that are top of mind, it's ransomware, causes disruption, starts with a targeted attack, targeting people via email. Most companies have an email security strategy. Most companies probably have a ransomware response program. But what's missing from that is that people, targeted threats, targeting people via email. We've got the email bit. We've got the targeted attack bit with the visibility and response, people in the middle. And quite easily, you've got your email threats, you've got your email alerts. How about you just take it that next level deeper and not just generically look at all the threats that are targeting the company, but break it down further and say, what emails are going to specific people? Are there specific job roles? Are there specific functions within the business that are more targeted than others in ransomware? Because then you can build a program and adapt your program to protect that group of people or to train them on ransomware specifically. You don't need to train everyone if not everyone's being targeted. Second attack, business email compromise. Ransomware is about disruption, business email compromise, email fraud, spear phishing, whatever you want to call it. That's about money loss, data loss, money loss. So again, they're largely delivered via email targeting people. We've got the email bit covered. We've got the money bit covered, usually by the finance team. Security hasn't been involved in the past. More and more security is being brought into those money loss attacks, those wire fraud attacks to prevent them. Again, let's get visibility into who those BEC attacks are targeted at. Then we can train them. We can put controls around them. We can implement multi-factor authentication. We can put processes around those people to say, don't wire money if you get an email without calling the supplier first and validate that they have indeed changed their bank details. And then the third one, data breaches. Data doesn't lose itself. It's people interacting with that data, moving it to the cloud, putting it on USB, transferring it to their personal device. Getting visibility into how people interacting with that data is part of your DLP strategy that most companies already have. You can start to embed people into those programs. So we're not saying rip and replace it, start from scratch. It's look at your threat profile, understand your business's risk profile, look at what you've implemented already, and then get that visibility and insight to get that next level intelligence into that people perimeter, into that people risk.
And I guess when you think about the capacity that we build within an organization, I mean, there's a constant report about the challenge that we have about getting the right skills when it comes to security, the shortage of skills. And, governments are doing what they can in terms of providing initiatives or motivation for universities and colleges, secondary schools to take people down the science, technology, engineering, mathematics route. And that's great. But how much more do you think we need to focus from a national policy level, but then also how it drips down into organizations on the human sciences?
Yeah, I completely agree that we need a balance. It's not one or the other. In fact, I think if you look at recent job listings for security awareness professionals, I think some of them can be a bit patronizing because it takes it down to we need someone that can only communicate, or we need someone that puts programs together, where actually that job role of building an awareness program is quite complex because you need to understand the threats that are targeting people. You need to understand people. You need to understand change management. You need to understand communication. You need to understand design. There's so many elements that are required into building a training program that it's not one or the other. You need different skills. You need different types of people that can ultimately build that program. I think as well, though, because of the massive shortage of people that, are required to fill these job roles, we need to think creatively as an industry. I don't think we only need to rely on the public sector to drive that change. I think there's a lot that companies can do, going to high schools, going to universities, engaging with students, getting them excited about this, even if they're not in technical or studying technical subjects. But we really need people that can communicate, that are engaging, that are actually comfortable being in front of people. Another example is in 2019, we did a training session with a healthcare organization. It's kind of giving it away, but it's not the one you're thinking of. But it was a healthcare.
Okay.
A healthcare organization. And we did a training session for their clinicians, their nurses, physicians, dentists, and so on. And they came together, and it's this annual thing that they do. And typically that session that they do, that offsite, is more around patient care and patient best practices and, the latest and greatest in healthcare and, basically medical stuff.
Yeah.
But this organization had a breach. Mm-hmm. And in the eyes of the chief medical officer, for her, she was like, this actually impacts patient care and patient health. And we need to think about cybersecurity as clinicians.
Yeah.
Because that is part of our duty of care to these patients.
Mm-hmm.
But this group, when they had this training session or this offsite, they didn't reach out to the security team.
Right.
They came to us as a vendor.
Right.
Because they had never engaged with the security team internally. They had no interaction with them. So they had the phishing buttons and simulated phishing and online training and all that great stuff, but they'd never actually met them. They'd never seen them. Because I guess potentially you could say the security team weren't comfortable being in front of this group of clinicians or couldn't speak their language. Yeah. And this is why you need different types of skills, people that can communicate and engage and feel comfortable being in front of lots of different types of audiences.
That's really interesting. I mean, it's sort of slightly, when I hear that, there's a slight worry about how did they ever get a business case through for, for me, I'm like, this is the risk to use the CMO, the Chief Medical Officer. If there's a breach of confidentiality regarding this, for me, security is all about risk. And I'm like, okay, my job is to facilitate a discussion where it becomes apparent what the risk is going to be to their strategic KPIs or their operational KPIs. Or if you're dealing with doctors, for example, they all sign a code of ethics.
That's right.
Okay. There are all professionals sign a code of ethics in effect. And as part of that is always some statement about confidentiality, for example. So, when I hear that, I'm like, wow, they hadn't really been engaging with security. How did the security team get any sign off for anything? Are they actually finding themselves struggling to get sign off? And in which case, maybe that's the reason why you're not getting sign off, because you're not actually, the value is at that end, not in your department. You're
not in protecting the laptops and the network and all of that. And that is important, but we have to engage with the business. We have to understand the business, and we have to bring the business along with us.
Yeah.
And also, only by engaging with the business can we protect the right things, because you have these clinicians sharing a lot, like this is the latest innovation that we're developing, or this is how we're caring for patients, or this is where we're moving data, or, this is the latest technology in, keyhole surgery. And you're hearing all of that. And that gives you ideas of, okay, well, potentially risks might be exposed here. Yeah. But if you're not where those people are, if you're not engaging with them, if you're not aware of how those people work and the data and systems that they interact with, then what are you protecting?
Yeah. And could you be protecting the wrong thing? And what does that do to your brand as a department? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think really importantly, the point is that not everybody's, you can have people incredibly confident in their own particular world, their own part of the overall chain within an organization, the overall process. They can be absolutely confident, they can be at the top of the game, they can be very, very senior. As soon as you take them out of that comfort zone, you put them somewhere else, they can sometimes really respond to that in a unconstructive way. Might be one way. They'd either shut down, refuse to join in, but it's, they feel like they're having their arms twisted. And that comes across. So when they join in with the group, instead of them sort of being an ambassador and talking about things in a really positive, engaging way, you can almost sense that they don't really want to be.
I don't want to be here.
Yeah. And that really has an impact. And I think that's really important for all the listeners to take away, that sense of sometimes, and we do this, we say, look, let's got a great idea for an education wellness care. Let's get so-and-so who is, the CTO or the CEO to come down and to do this for everybody. Now, most CEOs are used to doing public things, and most C-level suite are as well. But sometimes we choose people who are like really, really spot on, their knowledge of the subject matter is spot on. But you've never asked them to stand in front of a group of people and do
But we're CISOs. There's a C. You are technically an executive, and a key skill required is to be able to communicate, is to be able to inspire the organization, is to be able to inspire them to care about security, to, again, think about their behaviors and make sure that they're acting in an appropriate manner, that they're following those policies. You need to be able to inspire the organization, which is why I think, again, that communication is so important, which is also why we're seeing, a lot of CISOs now coming into the industry have change management potentially as a background. It's not necessarily just technical anymore. You've got a team that understands those technical threats and the technology, and they implement it. But ultimately, as a CISO, you also have to care. You need to be there, and you need to inspire the organization to ultimately move towards that direction that you had benchmarked at the beginning of your program.
It's really interesting you should say that, because, I sometimes think about a key part of that role, the CISO role, is change. Okay. If when you finish, everything is the same as when you started, you've really been a caretaker rather than a chief information security officer, arguably. And some people say, well, maybe nothing changed. And I say, you're telling me that your market does not change. And I did an interview with Dr. John Kotler, who, in terms of change management, he's just like right up there. And we were having a conversation, and he was saying that, he said, the thing is, whenever you look back in time, he says, when he goes back to the beginning of his career, he looks at the companies that were around then, and he says, most of them have gone. He said, now the companies that are in now, he said, in 10 years, 15 years time, he said, because of how things change so quickly nowadays, quite a few of them will have gone. And I think that's the thing, if you join an organization and when you've left it, nothing has changed in terms of what you're doing out of security, there is a strong chance that your security is out of touch with where the organization needs to be for it to survive. And so a core part of the CISO role, completely agree with you, is about changing it to enable the strategy to evolve and to achieve your strategy in 3 or 5 years' time. So it requires change.
Absolutely. And this is why we hear about things like shadow IT and, this business unit has built this new application and exposed the business to this risk and blah, 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 and we need to shut it down. No, you don't need to shut it down. Again, this is people trying to work in new, innovative ways. Yes, it'll expose risk to the business, but what controls can you implement to mitigate that risk? Yep. How are you communicating with them? How are you enabling them? How are you trying to be there with them to drive the business forward? We've heard it before, but it can't be the Department of No. And certainly your security programs and the messaging that you're putting out there can't be, accusatory. They're victims, oftentimes, people that click on things and engage with things. Or they're just trying to do their jobs, by buying this cloud application and so on. Yeah. So what we need to do is not blame, but actually say, you know what? That might have been an error, or, there's a risk here, and here's what we can do together to close that gap, to allow you to continue to use this thing securely. Here's how we need to train you to make sure this doesn't happen again. Or if you click on something or typing your credentials to something, just tell us quickly so that we can respond to it more quickly. Yep. And that way, everyone's working together to protect the business, not you did something wrong and we're going to punish you. I know you had a whole conversation with Andrew about consequences. That's a whole other podcast. But yes, consequences are required if someone keeps making the same mistake. But if someone makes a mistake once or twice, train them, help them understand the error of their ways, the risk it exposes to the business, the impact of that behavior. Because if they don't know what that impact is, they're just going to do it again.
Absolutely. Okay. So it's been great having you on the show.
So good to talk to you.
I think I've met somebody that can talk more than me.
I am a talker, Bruce.
Yeah, this is great. Great. I mean, most of the listeners, I go, well, if we cut all the Bruce bit out, we'd be left with 15 minutes. And in this case, they're going to go, wait! Nikki's outdone Bruce. I know that's fantastic as far as I'm concerned. What a brilliant way, it really is, what a brilliant way to, I guess, sum up the cybersecurity mini-series with Proofpoint. Totally understand why they've got you on as the director for the international product marketing side of things. Yeah, and clearly, enthusiastic and that's really come across. So I hope our listeners, I'm absolutely confident our listeners would have got a huge amount from listening to your views upon sort of human-centric approaches to education and awareness, bring around that change in behavior and culture, which is the thing that I completely agree with you. That is the next big thing for me. I think it's the next opportunity for us to significantly improve how we're addressing cybersecurity holistically across the organization. Thank you very much for your time, because I know how hard it is to get your time.
No, thanks so much, Bruce, for having me. It's been fun.
Hi there. Well, I hope you found that conversation with Nikki really interesting. I know I did. I mean, again, it's always the problem for me when I'm making notes as we're doing these interviews, the pages of notes that we end up making. And actually, one of the hardest bits about doing the podcast is trying to write the show notes at the end. They could be so long. But I think maybe 3 key things that I'm going to take away from that conversation with Nikki, other than I could probably speak to her for a couple of more hours, is that one, Nikki started off by talking very much around the need for conducting some sort of baseline assessment of where you're currently at, comparing that to where you want to be, and then coming up with an appropriate roadmap along to get you there. And then the importance of, once you know where you've got to be, is then building your metrics around that. I think one of the key things that comes for that, that Nikki and I spoke about maybe about 3/4 of the way through the interview, is the need for an information strategy. Now, as I said in the interview, I mean, over the years when I've done training for people, it's often really got people's attention in the class when we start talking about information strategies around education and awareness or behavior and culture. I cannot say how important it is, or I cannot do it justice to say how important it is about having like a strategy for getting the information to enable you to make better informed decisions as the person that's responsible for the human factor within your organization. So yeah, that was the first point. I guess a second thing that I would pull away from the interview with Nikki would have to be how Nikki interprets putting the human at the center of absolutely everything you do around security. So really having a focus upon what human factor risks exist, which humans have access to what information, which is considered to be the most critical, which humans are more likely to be, repeat offenders, which humans employees most likely to get attacked by cyber criminals. It was this was an information strategy. It's having information around the humans, the employees, that were most at risk in terms of how they respond to things, but also most at risk in terms of how they were going to be much more likely to be targeted because of the nature of what it is they do and what they have access to by cyber criminals. So I think that was a really interesting point to take away. And then the third bit, which I think has been a consistent theme really throughout all the episodes, not just in this particular series, but in every series of the Rethinking the Human Factor. And it's been great to see that Proofpoint really get it as well for me, the importance of actually having skills and resources that have a focus on the aspects of what it means to be human, human awareness, human behavior, human and culture. And how Nick is sort of reflecting on the fact that without those type of people and those type of skills, psychologists, neuroscientists, physiologists, people that specialize in culture, sociologists, etc., all the people from the humanities side, without having those people in your teams, or at least having skills and layering up your own skills with some insights from that particular area, how it just makes your job in terms of sort of trying to reduce those human factor risks so much harder. So, get those skills in-house, bring them in or train up yourself and help yourself be more effective when it comes to managing employee awareness, behavior and culture. So yeah, I think 3 key takeaways from the interview with Nikki. Now, like I said, that's the end of our cybersecurity mini-series with Proofpoint. It's been great to have Proofpoint on board, really supporting us in terms of our own belief, which goes back many years now, about trying to design with the human in mind. So yeah, just one final shout out to Proofpoint. Thank you for supporting us here on the show and to continue to sort of do our job, which is to help raise awareness of the forces at play when it comes to influencing awareness, behavior and culture within an organization. So if you found the podcast insights interesting and you think, so I'd like to learn more insights around awareness, behavior and culture and bring around changing that, and I'd like to know how I can actually be applying that within my own specific organization, how can you go about that? How can you address that challenge? Well, the good news is in 2017, I've been helping CISOs, education awareness managers and security professionals with that exact problem. And I've been helping them through both my training courses that I provide and also the coaching programs that I also run as well. Now, the good news is we've got the revised, updated version of the Rethinking the Human Factor Foundation course coming out. That's actually going to be published at the end of September. And there are a number of courses planned throughout the next 12 months. And those courses are going to be both within the European time zone, the US time zone, and also the Australian time zone. So if you're interested in the Rethinking Human Factor Foundation course, how we can help you develop your own skills and abilities to apply behavioral insight, cultural insight to how you design your strategies and initiatives and programs for bringing around changes in employee awareness, behavior and culture. Visit the site, register for one of our webinars, our monthly webinar, and come and join us and hear about all the work that we're doing in terms of helping build that capacity for people like yourselves, and also take the opportunity to ask us some questions in relation to the challenges that you're facing. So it'd be great to join us again here on the show in a week's time. I promise you it's going to be a really interesting show, because actually we've got our next data protection regulator coming and joining us on the show to talk about awareness, behavior and culture from a data protection perspective. Thanks for joining us. I hope that you'll be listening again soon.